Hello there, and welcome to yet another episode of the Uganda Diaspora show. My name is Lynn Kyomugisha, and especially those of you who are meeting me for the first time, and those of us, those of you who are joining this show for the first time, you're very much welcome. Today, of course, we, as expected, are looking at very interesting developments in the East African region, particularly in Kenya. And we will be taking a look at the protests there that have rocked the Kenyan nation, but also sort of sent shockwaves across the world, wondering what that was about, because Kenya is not very common in the recent past was not really into protests or something of the sort, but here we are, and we are facing something very, very extraordinary happening in Kenya. I welcome you once again, and I'm glad to see we have Mulongo Simon. It's been a minute. We're glad to have you again. We have Francis Kamuhanda and Okot Ochen, and of course, our very own Miriam Kyomugasho. Today, we will take a look at Kenya and what this means for Uganda. But I think technically it is what it means for the East African region. On 26th this month, following protests in Kenya, the president of Kenya, William Ruto, after his most severe crisis, agreed to the terms that were being forwarded by the demonstrators. But before I can delving into the depth of this conversation, I'd like us to briefly take a look. What did we pick from this protest? They're still ongoing, dissipated a bit, but they're still going on. We'll see how that goes for us as the East African community. I'll begin with you, Mulongo Simon. What did we learn? What did we pick from the protests across the Lake Victoria?
Thank you very much. I hope I'm being heard.
Yes, you are.
Right. But before we talk of lessons, what are we seeing? I think maybe we start with what we are seeing, then we can drive lessons. What happened in Kenya is shocking because the country has had a history of only inter-ethnic fighting, rivalry, following political contestations, like we had first of all, there was that attempted coup in the early 90s. No, in the early 90s, and then we had the tribal clashes during Moi time, pitting the Kalenjins, the Luyas, the Jaluos, and the Kikuyus, especially those who settled in areas perceived to be dominated by other tribal areas, and the 2007 clashes after disputed elections. So we saw this going tribal, and the people who were involved were actually right from the young ones up to the old ones. But this time, it is something very unique, what they've called Generation Z, the people who were born in the late 90s, in the mid 90s and 2000, early 2000. And these people are young and are cut across the country. They're not there for tribes. They're just there for their interests, what they believe are their interests and rights. People have not seen actually war or violent conflicts. People who are a CNN product, people who are internet products, and who believe in the rights. Once there is a right in America, is also a right to them in Kenya. A right in China is the right in Kenya or something like that. And so they even don't care about their parents because the number of them just came out spontaneously, with or without the knowledge of the parents, and they were on the streets. It was such coordinated that we feared whether this was being orchestrated by some groups of people and funding them. But apparently, if there was any support facilitation, it was quite a quiet one. But the whole spontaneity of people, young people coming into the streets, coordinated using their mobile phones, smartphones, and taking charge of the media recasting of whatever was happening. And some of them, depending on their disciplines, if you are a technologist in terms of smartphones and all this, they had a backup team to do that, or teams. If you're a medic, then you had to set up some medical facilities for emergency evacuation and treatment, and so on and so forth. So the whole thing happened almost instantaneously, and it caught not only in Nairobi, but across the country in all the major cities, in Kisumu, in Eldoret, in Mombasa, and even where the president was in the northeast, in Garissa, it happened. And we're shocked because it was such a coordinated move, and without clear leadership. Everybody was a leader. Everybody was helping the other to take into consideration what should be done. And initially it was very peaceful, and the police started trying to act like this is a peaceful demonstration within the Constitution of 2010, where demonstrations are supposed to be, as long as they're peaceful, they have the right to do that, and they kept actually referring to the law. Now, what I could see is that these youths are so fearless. They're fearless, and they didn't care about the armed police. And as long as the armed police were not trying to fight back, they continued to surge and move in areas, and they did not even know what is a restricted area or not. Like going to Parliament, they just stormed Parliament, and off there they were carrying the mess. They even don't know what the mess means. They just called it something, some names. So the lesson, maybe if I come to the lessons, is that, okay, before I come to the lessons, also there are some opposition politicians who jumped on the streets, but they're not even recognized. They could not recognize these politicians in their suits, moreover in their suits. The youth's uniform was total casual, sneakers, but these politicians were in suits. They thought they were in Westminster Abbey. And so they were embarrassed, though they actually left back to their parados and went away. I called some of my friends in Nairobi to tell me what was happening. That even our son is not here, our daughters are not here. Hey, we're seeing them on social media. So they totally did not want any direction from these elders. They were on their own.
So Simon, sorry to cut you short. I wanted us to just run through from what we really see from these demonstrations, especially led by Gen Z, as they want to call themselves. Let me pick on other people, then we can come back and get into the depth of it. But thank you so much. Francis Kamuhanda, what do you pick from the demonstrations and down in Kenya? What, from your vantage point, what do you think?
Lynn and the other fellow panelists, it was so unfortunate for what happened in Kenya, but it was wrong due, because how, if it happens in Uganda, I wouldn't be surprised. One thing we must understand is that there is always population shift, which Uganda also has. You have to agree. So you can't begin telling a person who was born in 1990, who is now maybe 30 and plus years, that you went to the bush and fought. That is nonsense. If we liberated the country, so what? Then people should see the liberation play into. So I think that is a fundamental factor that we need to learn from Kenya. Then number two, we also need to know that much as we talk of governments should be pro-people. The policies, politicians should be mindful of the policies they make. I'm not saying that taxation is bad, but policies should always be well examined, because once you begin living a luxurious life like Maria Antoinette, then don't expect that the population is seated. Now the young people are always observing in the background. And then from there, now Simon brought in an important point. They leverage technology now to say, how can we communicate and organize? Gone are those days where people would either communicate through radio and so on. But now knowledge, there is knowledge explosion and information flow. So we have to take into consideration these things. But what I would say, for Kenya, there were deep-seated grievances that cut across generations as how it is in Uganda. And therefore, if we are to be a learning country or learning as East Africans, we should be conscious of any other moves that we are making in as far as political dispensation is concerned. Otherwise, it is playing much. Misuse the country, misuse resources, or gross human rights and so on, they will come back to play. And you see, once it starts, once it is in motion, sometimes it is unstoppable. So that's what for now I can say as we discuss more. But again, as we would say, Kenya has a history of this revolution. Right away from 1952, the Mau Mau. You come to the recent post-election violence, the 1992 ethnic clashes, the 1997 Mombasa clashes, the 2005 Elgon insurgency, and so on. The list goes on and on and on. So as how we can also talk, the whole of East Africa has a history behind. And it's because, for a fact, when people say history repeats itself, I don't agree with that notion. What I agree is that people who are not critical enough, they repeat the same mistakes that other people did in the past. And then it is already a set ground for any revolution to occur. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Francis. Okot, Ochen, your thoughts on what happened in Kenya?
Yes, thank you very much, dear colleagues. My thoughts about what transpired in Kenya, and maybe even before I dive there, I want to say that there are lots of interesting political events in Africa in general. If you look just down south, South Africa itself, very interesting, with the recently concluded elections and trying to tailor that kind of government, national unity, and the dynamics in bringing different ideologically variant, entities together. So that is for another day, but very interesting. So I must say, in Africa, lots happening. Next door in Kenya, I must say that it wasn't a surprise. I think Kenya has been on a boiling point for a while, and the historical context, as my colleagues have indicated, just like Francis and Simon have all been hinting, the historical context since 1952 and the independence, and after the independence, the fallout between Jaramogi Oginga and Jomo Kenyatta. Then in 1983, the coup attempt by the Raila wing, that is there. Then the early 90s, we had the ethnic clashes during elections, where the current president was very central, in the KY, whereby they actually brutalize people. And the most amazing of the reason is that the youngsters managed to put aside their ethno-regional kind of identities aside, and they had to, go in one direction. I think that was very impressive. There was no way the leaders could divide the youth or the young generation, or you can call them the generation Z, or the youngsters. There was no tribal aspect, there was no party involved, there was no religion, but there was a cause. So for me, that was a very kind of a strong unifying platform, whereby I think we can learn a lot, even as Ugandans, that if we try to place aside sometimes our minor our minor diversities, that kind of fractures us, and we focus on more things that unite us, we could achieve a lot, as a people. This was kind of evident in Kenya, whereby the youngsters from all over Kenya, from the coast, to Nyanza, to lower east to central, to the mountains, all were speaking the same voice. It was very surprising that even in Eldoret, the hometown of President Ruto, there were demonstrations and protests. It was very surprising even in central, in Gema, or in the mountains where the Kenya Kwanza regime got almost close to 3.5 million votes. There were also protests. So that shows that if people come together, they can achieve a lot. And I think the fact is that bad policies or things that oppress people doesn't discriminate whether you are pro-government or anti-government. So the taxes that were being levied were heavy. I think on bread, on motor cars, on diapers. It does not discriminate anybody. All consumers, all users would be affected. Hence, they were affected. So for now, that's my take. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Miriam, I come to you. What do you make of these protests in Nairobi, Kenya, and across the entire country?
It was exciting to watch. The way the spontaneity, the way the youth organized themselves, like Simon was narrating. It was refreshing just seeing young people for some time who have been so quiet and lost in their TikTok videos of dances and all that, finally waking up to talk about governance, to check about how the government is ruling them. It was kind of like the prophetic Frantz Fanon said that a generation must wake up and define their cause or perish. So the Kenyan young generation is putting their stakes out there. They know how they want to be ruled, and they can't take whatever they are being given anymore. And they are standing out and saying, come on, Kenya is our legacy, is our future. So if you mess it up, you are messing us up. And it was, I think, a wake-up call for all youth in Africa. These uprisings are not happening for the first time. We first saw them around 2014, is it, or 2011, in Tunisia, then in Egypt, and they were called the African Rising, and they've been happening spontaneously around either Burkina Faso, Sudan, South Africa, protesting ABCD. So the Kenyan youth are not starting something new. They are just doing what others have done, and successfully with the results, and made changes in their own countries. And it's quite also refreshing to see a president who listens to the people. So if whatever happened in Kenya happened in Uganda, you can imagine what was likely to happen. It is so sad that they lost 7 kids who were shot by the police. In Uganda, it would have been a bloodbath. And those are things we need to think about. Protesting is a constitutional right of citizens. It's like another way of doing politics. And it's lawful, it's illegal, and it's acceptable. It's like one way people who feel they are not represented by the elected leaders come out to say, no, enough is enough, this is what we want, and it's high time you also listen to us. But the way the government reacts to that, the way, for instance, the Ugandan government would rush out to suppress such voices, is a cause of concern. If we've reached at that point, by the way, the Kenyan situation compared to the Ugandan situation, that's another observation. Kenya is so much well off compared to Uganda, whether it's the way they are doing their finances, the economic situation, whether it's the political situation, whether it's the everything. The Kenyans are so well off, even their GDP is much better than the Ugandan GDP. And if you see the Kenyan protesting, that means if at all we were to follow the same standards by the same grievances, Ugandans would have protested a long time ago. But maybe they know the consequences of having of going out there to make your case if you are Ugandan. And the fact that Kenyans young kids can have that confidence to walk on the street, and I think they have confidence in their government. They know that their government is not going to shoot them. They know they're going to listen to them. So that's also something we should copy from there. If you have a security forces, if you have public, the police, which is there to protect the citizens as well as the leaders. In Uganda, whose forces are they? Who would they protect first? The citizens or the leaders? So all those issues to really be that we should think about. And yeah, but generally I was so happy to see young people just coming up and even watching their discussions, how the social media terrain has so far changed. It's quite refreshing and something good for our.
Right. Thank you, Miriam. Yes, indeed, it is something refreshing. And that goes to the fact that we now need to appreciate the power of social media, because I'm sure most of these youth were from different corners of the country. And not just, they didn't know each other. They just went with the vibe, as I want to call it, because we are now speaking Gen Z language. So the vibe was high, and so they stormed the streets and they made known their intentions. Now, regarding that, after those protests came forward, we saw that President William Ruto bowed to pressure from the public and rejected the contentious Finance Bill 2024 in its entirety and called for austerity measures to compensate for the potential revenue shortfall in his Kenya shillings 3.99 trillion. That is about 30.93 billion US dollars for the fiscal year 2024-2025. We will see how that develops. But a question for you, Simon Mulongo, is there's been growing reactions and statements in regard to President Ruto saying he's enslaved and supported by foreign interests, and he was never a pro-people in his, especially in his administration, on its outlook, I beg your pardon, and was bound to face the consequences of its priorities. And so, do you think, now I want us to diagonalize where all this stemmed from, because we saw that William Ruto came in as a hustler, as a face of the hustlers, but suddenly the question is he still a hustler? And so when they say his priorities have changed from what they used to be, and this is how we arrive here. What do you make of this? Because they're clearly saying Kenya's interests now are bigger than the people itself, the people that they lead. So what do you make of this, Simon?
I hope I'll get an opportunity to also contribute to the lessons, because
yeah, absolutely. We'll come to that.
But yes, you're right. I mean, President Ruto rode on the popular philosophy of aligning with the less privileged, and to ensure that it is not a ritual of only the former presidents and their families to rule Kenya. And so he played it so well, because he really acted and walked along the Mama Mboga and the hustlers. And his planning was meticulous, because he held meetings at every county level with the leadership and calculated the support that he would give the communities of every county, depending on the demographies and the structure of the population and the levels of poverty and so on. So people really voted for him, and he got an edge, albeit the fact that it was very narrow, and he had that sympathy. You're right in your insinuation that he seems to have abandoned that, because no sooner had he just been sworn in, then the lifestyle changed, and he started going more external than internal, and he started talking big, addressing World Economic Fora, being seen in Paris, in UK, in US, including the recent famous visit to the White House, where he made a caricature of himself, that he now even sat in the seat of the world most strong leader, which actually did not go down well with the people. So when you look at the budget, the way it was done, first of all, it was built on the previous finance budget, 2023-2024, in which a lot of taxes were targeted very many people, new tax areas like housing and so on, even agricultural products, to the extent that people start seeing the erosion of the very benefits they would have enjoyed. Then this made matters worse, because the IMF people were only interested in recouping their money, because it is true that President Ruto took over a very huge debt, because they are close to 70% of GDP. And so the IMF is just interested in getting that money. And he played into their hands. When he visited the West, he was the darling. He was convinced each time. They lined up people to speak to him and convert him. And he became a total convert, away from his own people. And people were watching. And when they came back, the tax structure, not only were they targeting and hurting people, they also heaping a lot of appropriation towards hefty and luxurious life of leaders. The president's office, they had a lot of money for donations. Maybe they are copying some of us, yes, donations and all these, going to churches and revamping the new carpets and renovations and so on. So it looks so luxurious on their side, while the ordinary people were really reeling under the heavy burden. And besides, the facilitation of the mamamboga and the hustlers was swallowed completely into the hefty taxation. So I think that Ruto definitely abandoned his people, and he used them as ladders, and he was speaking another language. This time it was somebody who is a refined intellectual, who does not resonate with the local communities. And so people saw him drifting away from them, and the evidence was clear with the budget structure. He was not for them at all. And so that's how they became angry. And remember, somebody talked about the triggers. One is that he tried to respond to criticism, the attacks that he suffered when he was campaigning by the former regime, combined, Central and all this, and of course mentioning him in scandals which were hardly there, stripping him of his security. So he started doing the same, stripping Mama Ngina's security, Kenyatta, privileges, and so on. And so people realized that no, we're not dealing with the politics just anymore. It's like personal aggression. And as such, they started sympathizing with certain quarters. So all these people started becoming mobilizers, emotional mobilization. And the youth, who have nothing to do with the political parties, who are there only for the individual merit, they saw all this as even the opposition was not for them. Remember, Raila had now been tuned to go for the AU job. So he was not in really now to do the opposition role. People like Kalonzo Musyoka, you could see he was throwing back very little punches, and which punches were not actually effective, because when they tried to join the protesters, they were just ignored. So this showed you that the people had now decided to do away with all the parties, because both of them were same culprits of oppression, and they're not actually helping the local hustler. So to me, you're right. He no longer played hustler. He played a very astute and international statesman, and who only could please the West and he disregarded his own domestic interests.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon, for that. I want to speak to you, Francis Kamuhanda. If I could read comments from one of the protesters, and he says, we currently have a president who is not a president. This president is following the orders of the Constitution. The Constitution is fine, but the government should be of the people, by the people, for the people. Now, we will change Kenya to be governed by youth, for the youth, and by the youth. I ask you this question because you are part of the opposition here in Uganda, and you might have an idea of what we are talking about. When he says follows the orders of the Constitution, how wrong is that for any leader to follow the Constitution? And where does this leave the citizenry if as he suggests, he shouldn't follow the Constitution?
Actually, I think we have to look at the context under which these young people mentioned. I think here it is following the Constitution, but interpreting it or following to satisfy oneself. I think put it clear, and therefore, much as you follow the Constitution, but what the Constitution says is not for the benefit of everyone. That's what the youth are trying to say. Therefore, that's why they are saying, okay, if it is like that, then we can also bring in a government that is only, technically they are saying you are time to eat, now we want to also eat, because that's what African politics has been revolving around, and that's what we are trying to dismantle, even we from ANT, to say that no, look here, it should be a government that is for people. But then I want to bring it to what someone said. The IMF, and then they wanted their money, and then it could be underlying cause and so on, and then Ruto danced to their tune. The first place we should first ask ourselves, how did Kenya into this debt trap? Of course, we should discuss it in relation to the whole of East Africa. The same, Uganda is also in the same trap, the debt trap. And now we can learn here a lesson that this is what, in case even when we have it, and then how do we use the resources that we got? Because every Ugandan is going to pay at the end of the day. But when you use them and you are living a yes life, like as how Simon said, the money that is available for the president to do donations and so on, stripping other people of the privileges, and then you bring it to Uganda, the luxurious life of the president, the luxurious life of the speaker, how members of parliament just award themselves money like that, and amid a hungry population. So I do accept that one of the things that interest is that the young generation or suffocating generations. For example, I would say Museveni suffocated the generations of mass. Now has also eaten again, because I think I'm understand I should also be a president somewhere, or Simon should now be a president. But you see how the moment you go on suffocating generation after generation, so that piling of that anger, that piling, it erupts at a time when you can't control it. So I was saying that one of the things that I like about Kenya is that the army and the court are still functional. Number one, you had when they were coming in, can't pull the national army to come and quench just a riot. This is the work for the police. At least you see some sense that there is some tension, and then you see the is coming up in Uganda, because even the law and the law is himself, is the state and the state is himself. The ones who commands. Generally, our life is in the hands of Museveni. If Museveni decided that today you will be dead, you will be slaughtered like a chicken, and nobody will ask. But at least for Kenya, there is some level That's what we have always asked, even in Uganda or in East Africa, that there should be accountability. There should not be misuse of security. At least people rise up and they something that can be done. All these are lessons important. Leaders need to know that there should be leadership that is pro people, and everything that you are doing, you should plan. And indeed, if you go the debt to come and carry out development, people should see it reflected in their daily life. Then you have always had me saying that I don't want somebody to tell me about how Uganda has progressed. I measure it from the come from. I measure it from my mother. I measure it from my relative.
I was asking Okot, Ochen, that President William Ruto has been accused of appearing tone deaf to complaints over the direction the country was taking. And he has been nicknamed Zakayo, greedy tax collector, as in the Bible, if you recall. So there's growing anger at the IMF and the World Bank, seen as drivers of Ruto's fiscal policies. So I ask, Okot, what do you make of this? And I mean, we sort of rely on these entities as our donors, and it's across East Africa, really. So how different is it from Kenya?
Yeah, thank you very much. I've heard people saying that Ruto has changed, but those who know the history of Ruto actually has not been a hustler. Ruto grew up in the household of Arab Moi. Ruto, as he was there from the time he was in the university, the YK, where he was, I think, the treasurer, and they minted money, fake money, and that went on. So when you see his kind of ideological kind of line of direction, it's not surprising that Ruto is a right-wing politician, whereby he aligns ideologically to the Western world. So the global policies like liberalization, privatization, those would pretty much do well with what is happening. So that is why I say that the Kenyans might be mad with Ruto. Because he gives in to the IMF without actually putting any strong kind of negotiation skills. He just gives in. He has become a green hype boy of the Western world. He goes to France. Next time he's in Italy. He's in Germany. He's in the US, giving the red carpet. When he goes there, he makes empty promises that actually horns and hurts the local Kenyans. So, and I'm not surprised, whereby even most commentators in Kenya are saying that the current financial bill is actually, a foreign agent kind of agent tailored it, is not done by the local, technocrats in Kenya. It was done by external forces from IMF. Hence, he has kind of brought a lot of detest and bad blood, and where the young generation have risen up. If you dissect and analyze what is there, you can see that things are not right. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Okot. Miriam, and referring to your opening statement, beg your pardon, you did mention that it was exciting to see that the youth now are doing what should be done. I'm paraphrasing, but you said it was exciting. Now, when we look at this and look at the opposition status across the East African nations, is this a precedent? Are we going to see that, new changes? Are we going to see the youth, becomes more comfortable and confident in rallying against, the democratic process that is not, befitting them? So I want to pick from you why you think it is exciting, and do you think this is going to be a new trend?
I think, yes, I think it's gonna be coped by other groups, whether in East Africa or somewhere else in Africa. But look at our population. 70% of our population in Uganda is below 30. The same applies to Kenya, different figures, but the biggest demographic portion of Kenya is young people. Same applies almost across all Africa. So it's not surprising to see the young people taking the lead. They are the population, and unfortunately, it's like whether the IMF blueprints are adopted across the terrain, because whatever is happening in Kenya, the debt, the extravagance of the government, in consideration of the ordinary person, the corruption, those things are happening across board. It's like, I mean, we are discussing Kenya, but if you are not looking at the word Kenya, if you take it off and put there Uganda, everything applies uniformly. Whatever is happening in Kenya is happening even more in Uganda. Look at our budget. It's a lot of debt financing, and yet we are still borrowing. And for who? Look at the expenditure. The president alone, the state house, I mean, just one family takes $1 billion, 1 billion Uganda shillings a day. Some money which would build a health center for in one sub-county is taken by a president, his family, just for one day. Corruption takes 10 trillion out of 70 that is in our budget. And that's our dilemma. The politicians are just there to eat, and nobody cares about the people. So if you are taxing people to pay that money, you are taxing people to finance the debts, the loans you've acquired, and then you embezzled that money. And the young people see the leaders. They see the leaders driving expensive cars. They see the leaders traveling abroad for no reason. They see it all on taxpayers, at the taxpayers' cost. And when they are sick, they are not going to go to your local hospital. They don't care whether Mulongo has 11 ICU beds, because they want to be the 11th person. They are going to be they're going to fly to anywhere in the world where they can access first-class treatment. Unlike your mother, unlike you, who can even die because you can't even access oxygen or just simple painkillers, or even have a doctor to give you first aid when you get an accident or you have a heart attack. So all these things, it's like, as Simon earlier said, we have a generation which is enlightened. They know what is happening across the world. And thanks to social media, it's like our world has become one village. When you see a youth in the USA and you are in Kenya, it's like you are trying to compare. What about me? Of course, you can't be at the same standards, but your leaders should be behaving in the same way. The constitution is almost the same. Why can't Ruto behave like a president in another country? Why can't I get public services like other countries I see? Even if you just compare within Africa itself. For instance, if a Ugandan was to compare themselves with another kid in Ghana, another kid in Egypt, another kid in Botswana, how are they faring? It's not about your resources. Okay, we know our resources are not that much, but how are we spending the little we have? You pay the taxes, where do they go? Where is the accountability? The leaders are really like grabbing the resources as if they are dying tomorrow, and they just, it's like looting, open looting. Look at what the Speaker of Uganda is doing. And why should we pay taxes to fund that? Why should we continue to be ruled like that without having a say in whatever is going on? So I wish whatever is happening in Kenya continues happening across the region, even across Africa. We need accountability. It's time we change the politics, the way we are governed. And this, I want to talk about the IMF, World Bank. It's not only IMF, World Bank. We also have the Asian tigers now bringing in money. So that big debt, why should they give us money if they know we don't even have capacity to pay that money back? So we are in diaspora. We also have campaigns for against the odious debt. That debt is neo-colonialism. And if Africans at all really care about self-governance and independence, we should campaign that debt. They should cancel their debts. They deliberately dump money in Africa, well knowing that they have leaders. Sometimes if you read books like The Economic Hitman, sometimes they coerce leaders to consume those debts, well knowing that they don't have capacity to pay, but they use those debts to control you. It's kind of like enslavement. It's colonialism by other means. And then we have to pay back. So they are not only controlling the current government by making you indebted. They come and sit in your Bank of Uganda. I mean, Bank of Uganda has a seat for IMF and whatever, and you wonder what they are doing there if we are an independent country. I assume it would be the same as in Kenya or any other African country. So they come and control us through their paycheck, through their loan, whatever. And they say they are coming there to manage the debt and debt servicing and all that stuff. But they are uninvited. They are the uninvited guests, and we don't need them there. If they feel we can't pay back their money, let them keep their money there. We don't need their money. And if at all we don't have those debts, those excessive loans, we would learn how to manage the resources we have. We would live within our means, and this corruption won't be happening. We wouldn't be overtaxed, and we wouldn't be having all that financial burden going on, rolling over to the next and the next generation as a sort of a control weapon for the Western imperialism. So the Kenyan youth and the Ugandan youth, any youth, I mean, it's high time we really campaign this debt. If our leaders can't rule without these loans, let them stop whatever they are financing until we have the capacity to fund it on our own.
Wow. I hope that statement is as itself, and I hope you can all of from all these conversations, we realize that when power corrupts, I think from all that we are talking about, power corrupts indeed. I come to you, Simon. And so we continue with the conversation on how all this, came up and the growing resentment against the Ruto administration. And so it all comes back to how he's handling all these things. We saw that Africa, of course, Kenya is already Africa's biggest, among the biggest Africa economies, and they say strongest democracies. We saw that on the eve of the climax of the protests, President Ruto flagged off 400 policemen to lead a stabilization force in Haiti. That aside, the US has designated Kenya as a major non-NATO ally, the first in sub-Saharan Africa, giving it access to training and equipment, but not obliging it to join NATO operations. We know what that means. But my question here is that do these demonstrations, are they pointing to the legitimacy of this government? Because people are saying there's need for national conversation. Hasn't it really escalated quickly?
I hope I understand your question. Did you mean that, could you just clarify yourself?
What I'm trying to say is they seem to think all these things seem to point to they're questioning the legitimacy of the William Ruto demonstration, government. And with all this happening, as he focuses on his foreign policies, as he focuses on things that maybe are not people-centered, are they all questioning his legitimacy as well, the entire administration?
First of all, President Ruto emerged as a neutral African statesman, and he started questioning a number of Western financing lines, including comparing policies for us to use the dollar as a medium of exchange for our international transactions. And even at one stage tried to decampaign the dollar and propose that we go and use our local currencies for forex activities. So, and he spoke so strongly against the dollar. And it's at that point that they realized that Ruto was becoming an errand boy, and they came up with very strong measures against him, including financing Raila to stage up protests against Ruto, and actually the government of Ruto almost fell. So Ruto was brought to table for bargaining, and some of the conditions that are not out there in the public, but which you can see visibly, is that one, he should discard the issue of non-alignment, and two, he should also discard the orientation towards the East, that's China and Russia and other tiger economies for support. And then three, that he must never challenge the dollar. And in the same line, not to challenge the Western sovereignty and domination, or rather relationship with his country. And because of that, Ruto could not even go to Russia when there was that Africa-Russia summit. Ruto skipped it with that explanation. The idea of bundling them in the bus, all those things, he had to retract them. He was forced to retract all those things. So he stopped actually criticizing the West and went to the West. And because the US was so frustrated about the geopolitics of Middle East and Northeast Africa, many countries had risen up against Israel. So they started cultivating countries and leaders in the region who will actually toe the line of supporting Israel and against Palestine and other related groupings in the Middle East and the global world. So countries like Sudan, which had collapsed, they even went for somebody who had committed a lot of heinous crimes against the population, including genocide in Darfur. And as long as he supported the line of recognizing Israel, he was straight away given support. And as we speak now, he's the one who is recognized as the de facto head of state of Sudan. He's welcomed with red carpets everywhere when he's not actually a legitimate overall leader of the Sudan. So Ruto was boxed into that corner. And so he had to shift. So even going to America and arriving in style and the whole kind of grandiose arrangement that was done with him had been packaged earlier. Some negotiations had started in Kenya and later on concluded in Washington. So the whole thing is that Ruto had no way but to toe that line, including nakedly seeing that his own local interests were being violated. But the fact that he was now an ally, a non-ally member of NATO, that perhaps he would be guaranteed some degree of security. But I can assure you that did not happen. Because look at it, all these processes have been going on. I have not seen any NATO countries coming in to help Ruto. And was left alone. The security systems were compromised. National intelligence services didn't seem to have seen what was happening. They could not even identify leaders and be able to engage with those leaders. And that's why Uganda is different. And as I will come to that later, Uganda will have identified leaders, either even stop them from their homes before leaving their homes at dawn. Kenya did not take any of those steps. And the whole thing evolved and took its own lifestyle that was beyond control, neither by themselves, but even by government. And I can tell you, the government was about to fall because the next step was go to State House. We hope that the Monday protests, which are planned, sit down, where they're going to occupy all the main routes and sit and fill them. No vehicle, no movement, no workers, nothing happening. It's going to freeze the country. And Kenya is a very weak, my dear sister Miriam was praising the economic muscle. I can tell you that the Kenya economic muscle is a form. It can evaporate any moment. The productive belt is very small. So if you sit on the rail line and on the main arteries of the roads, East Africa is going to come to its rails, because Uganda, Rwanda, Congo, Sudan, there will be supplies. And if you disrupt supplies for 7 days, people are going to come up to their knees. So the point is that, yes, Ruto's legitimacy in terms of national is contested by the fact that he won just 50.05%. So he has over 49.5% against him. That puts him on a very, very tight rope. And the people who easily got mobilized was also along the sentiments of unfinished business, where he embarrassed the whole sitting government with all the machinery, the armed forces, the police who were on the side of government, but he beat them because he used a number of calculations. So these people are not happy with him. So the challenge, of course, he won the elections. I know for sure he won the elections, but that victory is so narrow that the other side can be very strong, against which they can build up any opposition against him. So that's how I can answer your question. I don't know if I've made any sense, but I hope I have.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much. I want to ask Francis Kamuhanda. Francis, I'm seeing a commentator here says that I know a fire does not burn one homestead. It normally spreads to the entire neighborhood. I'm hopeful this fire will reach the neighboring homesteads of Kampala, particularly. Why I'm asking you this question is, we seem to, the entire East African community seems to have more the same grievances, but we have not taken up, arms or just come up to say, no, this is enough. And someone was saying that Gen Z has come of age and they're doing things we have been lazy to do. So really, have we reached a point where some of the things, because most Ugandans were looking over the fence and saying, wow, can this happen to us in Uganda, because we have huge grievances? Francis.
Thank you, Lynn. Your question, whether can this happen in Uganda?
Yes.
Yes, it can happen. Are the conditions suitable? Yes, they are suitable. Are Ugandans or the youth ready? That is where the debate should center. Now, like as we earlier on said, that in Uganda, all conditions are ready for this to happen. But the citizens, they don't have trust in it. We don't have trust in security operative. We don't have, for example, in police. In any case, sometimes we don't have trust in our members. So that's how you can see politics. Uganda is divided. We say divided maybe up to almost there. You look at the risk local politics back home, how it has been unfolding. You do that this will happen. But now, like as we have said, because the dictatorship of Museveni and his repressive government, I'm telling you what happened in Kenya, he's already ahead of the game. He's already ahead of the game, and Kenya, they would think that they lucky, at least their president still have some sense of knowing that the citizens and their property or human life. Also, I took so much money. Why are you coming after our own? We can also say enough that all or whether you are taking the US dollar per diem, bottom line you and we have to treat you. I think it is possible. It can happen in Uganda, and we have have our youth come up and say enough is enough. Because the country that is being destroyed is the country that are going to inherit. I remember when addressing the business people at Color, say, oh, for me, I'm going to die. I'm soon going to die. So this is your country, which means that for is just is messed up in that maybe 20 years or so will not be around. But I say, as I conclude, that when a chance prevails, it helps the prepared mind. So we need to do civic education as much as can, so that when chance prevails, my people are already prepared. And back to what Simon talked about the rooting up, challenging the dollar, and then all this against him. I think we still have a problem at the African continent. That leaders they go. I pray this AU, the African Union, was indeed a strong force. What these the neo-colonials have identified is that we don't have a strong voice isolating one at a time. The East community were a strong force when we are together. But now when they begin pulling up, one leader is saying this, one leader is saying that, with when we are negotiating the union as an East African community, insulated themselves and went solo. So all this now, and once is pulled out, like as Simon said, it weakens the entire of the East African country. And it is important that we go back on the drawing board. I don't know, but I have deep in the young generation, the African community, what it means by globalization. They already know what it means, the power of a country that is beyond borders. So I still believe that the more the youth get organized, or the younger generation, the better that they understand some of these issues. More of what Miriam and Simon were talking about, the effects of neo-colonialism and how we can overcome it. It would give Africa and East Africa a leverage that we can build on for the new generations, or for the coming days and years, to be a little bit brighter and stable for our country.
Thank you, Francis, for that. I'll ask you, Okot, Ochen. We're seeing that even as the Kenyan protests have simmered, there's still growing pressure for the president to resign. It's just 2 years into the Ruto administration, and already we are seeing growing unrest, not unrest per se, but growing resentment towards the administration. With this, as things look as we see now, what hopes do we have for the Ruto administration to come down and address the issues at hand? Is there hope? Do you think continued demonstrations will have these issues addressed, or do you think now he has to come back to his senses and be like, by the way, I was the hustler. I think I need to listen to my people as a hustler.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to say a few things. In the first place, I want to concur with those who say Ruto won an election. Ruto did not win an election. In fact, Ruto's victory was very controversial, whereby Kyomugisha, the Electoral Communication Chairman at the time, the IECBC chairman, has issues whereby there are even rumors that the US and other Western powers actually played a role in declaring Ruto as a president. And if you followed too, the Supreme Court of Kenya during the electoral process dispute ruling In fact, the parties were not all contented with the ruling. So to some degree, Ruto is on a very kind of a slippery edge in terms of support base. And I think if today elections were to be held, I think he would lose. And from what I can see, his power base is really kind of also fragmented. If you can see him as the president and his deputy reading from different chapters. While he was in Nairobi, in State House, trying to, talk to the country, his deputy afterwards also addressed a rally in Lamu in the coast, in fact, indirectly pointing, fingers at Ruto. And if you follow closely too, you find that right now the populace in Kenya and outside of Kenya are demanding for his stepping down. He actually has defied that. And if you notice, he has even kind of tried to infiltrate, the youngsters, their solidarity. I told you before that in Eldoret, there were some groups of youth who were already being kind of mobilized based on ethnic kind of groupings to counter the protesters and demonstrators. So Ruto is every day, losing, the value face. In fact, most commentators and observers are trying to say if there's a free and fair elections, then Ruto might be a one-term president. He will make history in Kenya as a one-term president. Two, he has even lost, I think, solidarity and support from many African countries because he has kind of positioned himself as a blue-eyed boy of the Western world. In fact, I know that Raila Odinga is trying to go to the AU, but with Ruto being his campaign manager and trying to put him forward, the way he's trying to, advance the interest, the interest and the hidden, kind of agendas of US and their NATO allies that might even compromise the chances of Kenya going to attain the AU chair. So Ruto has actually lost from both the continental and the national level. And I believe that if we continue that way, if the country continues that way, I think the next 2 years left, if he's lucky, he will finish or will leave the presidency a very tainted person and might end up even maybe, being haunted, worse than the likes of Moi and even Uhuru Kenyatta. Why? You realize that he tormented a lot Uhuru when he took over power, So I think from my view, I don't have much, kind of political desires and appreciation of President Ruto from day one, from his ideological background, from the time of Moi, from the time when he was in Kibaki's government, he was Minister of Agriculture, he was a vice president of Kenya. This is a guy who likes just to manipulate and he's an opportunist. I don't actually, and I wish he could collapse tomorrow for the better. Thank you.
Well, you wish he could collapse tomorrow. Yeah. I don't know about that. It would take really a lot, I suppose, but I hear you. Miriam, as we now delve into the lessons that we learn, we have over the years for a long time admired Kenya's democracy as Ugandans, and I speak from experience because many people have wanted us to have some sort of confidence that Kenyans have. But we don't. We fail oftentimes. The question here is, as we look over the fence and admire what our neighbors are doing and probably achieving, and we sit here and wheel all that away, what do we learn? Do we actually learn anything? Because this is not the first time. We've had quite a number of them. Remember 2008, this also points to Kenya's democracy. It has continued to grow instead, not stall. So what do we learn? Do we actually learn?
Yeah, as Ugandans, I'm going to talk plainly from Ugandan experience. At least we've seen a government which respects the people. If the young Kenyans were demonstrating in Kampala, like I said earlier, it would be a bloodbath, and thousands would be disappearing in safe houses where they are being tortured. Some would be in prison. So that's a lesson. We can have leaders who can at least let people demonstrate. I mean, there were some skirmishes and some kids lost their lives, but it's very minimal compared to what could happen in Uganda. And if we, through experience, we saw what happened in 2019 before the elections. We saw what happened during elections. Even up to now, we still have people that the government cannot account for, which they kidnapped. Either they killed them or something happened. They can't produce them anywhere. So we assume maybe they are dead and they are trying to hide the fact. So what we learn is that we are under a dictatorship, a very worse dictatorship compared to the Kenyan one. So that is some food for thought. Secondly, we also see that young people can make a difference. They are young, but they are very informed and they have the energy, they have the power. Actually, the youth in all history, most of the leading change leaders, they are change makers. The leaders provide the philosophies and ideologies, but it's the young people who do the work, who do the foot soldiering. So having a young population in Uganda, I think that's a sign of hope that in future we have enough manpower to cause change in our politics. Another lesson, it's what Simon alluded to about if Kenyans demonstrate and they block the highways, what will happen to the landlocked, incompetent, economically insufficient Uganda? We can't produce what we consume. So if they block the roads which bring us life in form of consumable commodities, we are including fuel, we would have a crisis on what to do. Do we have enough fuel reserves to cater for the crisis period? I don't think so. Do we have any substitutes? The Mombasa route is still far and not enough. We haven't developed the water transportation across Lake Victoria, which would ease some of the bottlenecks which cause delays in bringing commodities from the coast to Kampala. But then it's a blessing in disguise. At least it shows how incompetent we are. It's like a reality check, and we need those reality checks in life once in a while. Let's look, it helps us to mirror into ourselves. What are we doing wrong? Where are we lacking? And how can we improve ourselves? So the Kenyan example, if the Kenyan youth can demonstrate when their budget is 1,000 times much better than Uganda, when our corruption is much worse than theirs, when our politics are really that bad, what are our Ugandan youth doing about it? What is so special about Kenyans that it's lacking in Uganda? We have the same capacity, we have the same internet they have, we have the same education and exposure they have. So why are we not also causing change? We don't have to go on the streets like they are doing, but why not even go on the streets? There are our streets. Demonstration and protest are a constitutional right of every citizen. If you feel something is not addressed by your elected leaders, you have a right as per the Constitution. And the police should protect you as you express yourself and put out your grievances on what you feel should be addressed. So Uganda should stop fearing. I think it's high time Museveni realizes that you can't control people with a gun. Humans also need freedom. Freedom is a right. It's a basic right. Freedom of choice, freedom of self-determination, and freedom of speech. So we need our freedoms to express ourselves and determine the Uganda we want, the future we want to live in. Rightly, like Museveni said, as you earlier said, he is living in his last days, which is a natural human cycle. He is 80 and going forward, I mean, it doesn't even need most of the resources, but the young people need them. He doesn't care about school. He has taken all his grandchildren abroad to study on taxpayers' money. I hope, I expect, because I never see his children do any business. So where do they get the money? And he has lived all his adult life on Ugandan taxpayers' money. 40 years when he came to power. I think he came to power when he was around 45. Ever since then, he has raised his kids on Uganda taxpayers' money. Of course, some of it is his right, because if you are working, you're earning a salary, that's your right, and you've really worked for it. But most of it is extra expenditure that is not accounted for, given the amount that goes into the State House budget and those classified expenditures. So he doesn't know the plight of an ordinary person. I don't know if he has ever, I don't know if his children have ever said, have ever had to debate about how to live, how to spend, whether today, how to divide your money between school fees, medical, rent, transport, you know, that type of tight economic life that ordinary people live, to bargain whether to buy Panadol or to sustain your headache and see if it can last the next day, because you need money to buy food. So that's the life of ordinary Uganda, and he is far, far removed from that. The difference that Kenya has between us and Uganda, Kenya has had a change in the government, and they say Ruto go home. They hope for another leader tomorrow. Even if Ruto messes up 5 years, they're going to have another leader. But that doesn't happen in Uganda. That is something that has become elusive ever since independence. And we don't even expect any peaceful change, even though we hold ceremonial elections. So when we are really looking at Kenya for lessons, it's actually seeing what are they doing right, and they are continuing to do things so right, including these demonstrations. That's also another right step forward. And I think we have a lot to learn from them. You know, they like saying that Africans, you know, you are poor, you can't afford ABCD, that those demonstrations happen in America, they can't happen in Africa. But look at them, they are doing it, and they are doing it successfully. So we can, and maybe we can even do it much better, since we are more hurting than them. So I think we have a lot to learn from them, and we should really put our ear on the ground and see how much we can borrow from them, how many mistakes they've made, and how we can improve on that and even do ours much better. And I wanted also to comment on Ruto. I mean, let's not forget that Ruto was an ICC inductee. That guy participated in the 2007 massacres that led to the death of many Kenyans in the Rift Valley. So he's not a clean leader as such, and now that he's imposed, is looked like the West is managing him as their project. I think now they are moving away from Museveni to Ruto, because Museveni used to occupy that role of being a Western, I don't want to call them a puppet, but they are almost puppets, you know, sending, you are the one to send military in Somalia, you are the one to do this for them, you are the one to do this. I mean, you are the blue-eyed boy. Now Ruto is taking up that route. I think they will protect his government because they need him. And given him his age and his mistakes, I think they've tried to realize that they can't rely more on him going forward. So they are looking for the new recruits, and Ruto is occupying that space. But I don't think I mean, he can win the next term, but I'm not so sure. Kenyan politics are very dynamic and they can change anytime. But as Ugandans, really, it's a lot of concern. You see, in Uganda, the civil society is dead. All the channels of political expression are stifled. The political parties are as good as dormant because you can't do anything. You can mobilize, yes, but the NRM 7 has to limit on how you mobilize. It's not even the constitution, it's him. He allows you that margin which he feels is good enough for him and his political interest. So we have that challenge of having no enough political space to express ourselves. The political parties are not, they are incapacitated. The civic space is being stifled. It's almost dormant. The other civil societies, the academia, the individual political leaders, the religious leaders are now like puppets. They are all like subdued into NRM corner. It's not even NRM party because even NRM party is almost non-existent. Now it's Museveni and his family. And that is not the future we really want to see. And I wonder going forward whether it's even sustainable, even by Museveni himself. So it's a cause for worry, and it's something that we really have to think about deeply.
Right, yes, indeed. Thank you so much for that, Miriam. Simon, I come to you, and now we are looking at the lessons we learn, but majorly we are looking at the fact that we never learn, because from what has been happening, and we continuously admire this nation from here, looks like we never learn. But I ask, what do we learn indeed?
If we never learn, then what do we learn? Only a wise person cannot learn from lessons. The fact that we can survive as communities and go through hardships, including existential hardships, it means we learn lessons. Whether you have Nyankole, whether you have Uganda, whether you have Gishu, or Abamasaba like me, for our existence to have been continuous, we learned from lessons. So we definitely learn. And I wouldn't want to paint a picture of not learning, because we have always learned. And a testament to this is our survival and growth, because institutions have to survive first and foremost, and then they have to grow against all odds. And Uganda is definitely growing, even if we think it should have grown faster than that, than we want. One is the lessons I see is involving citizens in decision making. It's very important that we have as a wide participation in decision making, whether it is fiscal or monetary policies of a country. And Kenya's lack of that or shallowness of that contributed to people even over anticipating what they should, what they could not even attain. Because when you look at the demands of the youth, which are not very clearly structured, because people are just jumping up, you're touching our phones, you're touching our, but when you are to consolidate those complaints, they can be responded to. Of course, on the overall that Ruto should have focused more internally. I agree with that. And over focusing on the demands of the West, there are circumstances that must have forced him to do that, and which has caused all this. But the issue is if he had involved wider participation and consultations, because in Kenya they don't have youth councils, women councils, elderly workers, that wide array of participation. And even Parliament sitting and inviting public to come and contribute to, like we do here in Uganda. It may not be the best, but I think ours is much better than that. Secondly, it is true that economic grievances can spark such protests, and we need to learn from this as a region and as a country. So we must make sure that we address any issues that can actually create such a spark. Tax education, we had the protests from the taxpayers in Kampala and a few other towns, but you could see the level of organization and sophistication was not as good. But the engagement was there, very active. They had a series of meetings with technocrats and then finally with the president. And by the way, when the president says, for me, I'm about to die, it didn't mean that therefore he has abandoned the cause, or that the people can fend for themselves, or that he can as well play dirty. No, he meant that the future of this country is dependent on how much resources we inject in terms of taxation. Because when we go to Europe and enjoy good roads and good airports and good all these kind of public services, it is because they have invested in those roads, because they have paid taxes. So I think the president was speaking from that vein, and I think he was just making an appeal, an emotional appeal. The other one is growing influence of young people. Yes, we have the structures of the youth, we have the structures of women and all this, but what kind of influence are they impacting in decision making? They shouldn't just be there for drama, they should be there for reality. And how much do they play back to help the other youths where they come from? Like National Youth Council, do they engage the youth communities back home? Do they explain things that they're engaging with the government on this side, whether in parliament, in cabinet? You have youthful members of cabinet. Do they actually engage their constituents? If they don't, then they must, to avoid this. The other one is the government accountability and addressing corruption. This is very critical. NRM, we have admitted that this is a monster that is in the room and is chewing us. So we should stop and walk the talk. I was happy that recently the president started opening the lead on that. But it should be seen to be going even much further to those who are seen to be at the root of the kitchen group of government, those who are in the deep state. They should also be, if there are allegations of that, they should be. And people making remarks as if making fun out of corruption. It's like, let's corrupt and share with others. We must treat corruption severely as a crime. And you should really make sure that we make the public desist from looking at a corrupt person as a hero. So all these things require that we do it all together, because corruption is not about those in government alone, but also those in opposition, even civil society. So let's take it up as one of the war tools and fight it seriously. Can these things happen in Uganda? Kenyans are very rich, the economy. Well, let's look at it. The top 10% of Kenya's population holds 58.1% of the country's wealth. 10%. The bottom 50% hold less than 1%. If you go to South Nyanza, go to Turkana, go to Marquette, go to Baringo, go to Northeast, Ukambani, poverty smells like this on your nose. People they're so poor that they cannot even build toilets for themselves or kitchens. That's how serious poverty is in Kenya. The rich and affluent are very rich, but the poor, the majority, who are 50%, yeah, and the richest people in Kenya, 1% of Kenyans hold more than 50, the poorest of 50%. 1% of Kenya's very rich people, they are richer than over 50% of the Kenyan wealth. So we can't praise that kind of disparity. We cannot praise it. The other one is we should now learn how to address economic inequality. And I've seen this creeping in Uganda very severely. We must find a way of doing the redistribution mechanisms in terms of employment, exposure to opportunities across the board, so that the people who look at this one community is better off. You go to a hotel, an expensive restaurant, you find one type of community or one and a half. Those are signals that is not a very good issue. Issues political stability and dialogue. Yes, dialogue is there. Can what happen in Kenya happen in Uganda? Yes and no. Largely, yes, but also some degree of no, because we don't have the same challenges. If you look at the date burden, it's not the same. We're at 53, they're at 64. If you look at how we've been using our social and economic mechanisms, whenever Gagawale, whether it has worked so much or not, parish development model, you see that there is a degree of trying to involve people at a micro level as much as possible, which is not happening in Kenya. So the money, when it comes down, it stops at the county level, and the county people have a lot of authority to determine which road and so on. So I think that yes, we have similar challenges, but it's not exactly like Kenya. Then finally, the force response in Uganda cannot be the same thing, because the capacity and ability to spring into action by Ugandan forces is far different from that of Kenya. Whereas the Kenya one seems to be a little softer and so on, moderate in a way, but they totally failed to control, for example, to protect parliament. They failed to protect even state houses or state lodges. They failed. We must not mix emotional reactions to serious governance issues. When a government is elected, you can challenge it, you can oppose it, but you be civil. You can register your discontent, but to say that you're now you're taking over power, what kind of establishment is that? You can't do that whether in America or UK, that you're threatening Westminster Abbey because there are taxation issues. You have to express. There are means and ways of expressing yourself. To say we're discontented with this, we oppose this, but tell them and put them to test. But to say that anything small, because you don't have iPhones, people are driving good vehicles, therefore you should march to State House, we must change, take over, I can assure you it will not happen. It will not happen in Kenya. For those who are wishing that Ruto is changed, because the modus operandi for changing governments is well outlined in the constitution. It's not by marching over to state houses. So Ruto should be protected. The government should be protected, but they should also put to test, to explain, to account, like they are trying to put. These groups which have no leadership, no agenda, no program, you cannot subject national perspective, aspirations, and the future to groups that are not organized, no ideological definition, simply because they're using economic discrepancies and nuances and want to take over power. Just give them power for 3 days. They're going to mess up Kenya. So we cannot just, I think, allow this kind of hooliganism. They expressed their points earlier, but now they're turning into hooliganism. And that one, to me, they're going beyond the age they're supposed to be. So to me, Ruto is a nice gentleman. He came from humble background. He's a calculationist like anybody should be. Even ourselves, what we're talking here, we calculate what should we say, how we should say it. States rise, empires rise, they also fall, but people to make those empires rise must be calculative. And that is Ruto. And he defeated a government, a coalition with opposition. And he had no capacity to do that if he was not just clever. So he deserves it. To me, he deserves it, but he should be careful. He must respond to the domestic needs, pressing needs, and he should not run away from the pillars on which he claimed to be where he is. So to me, I want to Lynn to say that the government in Kenya is being shaken, but there's no way they can overthrow it. Because that doesn't just happen like that, especially in our type of democracies. And secondly, that in Uganda it can happen, but it cannot reach that scale of Kenya. I'm also worried that if we don't address the issue of unemployment, issues of accommodation of the youths and participation, it can easily create a lot of glitches for our government, which we must avoid. Back to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Simon, for that. Very elaborate indeed. Allow me to take a look at what's happening in the chat room. Okot says Ruto does not listen to his citizens. There are a number of protesters who've not been accounted for. And he says that over 100 have been murdered in cold blood and hundreds injured and not accounted for by the region. Wait. Is this Kenyans? Yes, absolutely. Okay. He goes on to say, for Uganda, we have a long way to go. Corruption is part and the fabric of the Ugandan community. The President Museveni has managed to divide and rule using fears and intimidations. Ugandans fear tear gas. If Ugandans are not serious, the Museveni and family will rule Uganda for 70 years and above. It goes on to say you think Ugandans should look south of the, I beg your pardon, I'm trying to get this, south of the, okay, I'll get back to that. But maybe Okot, you could tell us more a little bit as you share your lessons from Kenya, and maybe from, because it's not the first time it's happening, and we continue to see lots of unhappy youth world over. So this growing unhappiness around the youth, is it because of the technology around us? Is it giving us confidence we originally didn't have? So, Okot, please.
Please repeat your question, though I would like to just backtrack a little bit and rebuttal a little bit of some of the arguments that were made by my comrade Simon. I must say that I followed his submissions. He started very well, and somewhere, somehow, I thought to comment on a few things. One, that about comparison of Uganda and Kenya, I would like to say that to a large extent, Kenya is way, way, way more kind of organized and more democratic than Uganda. What's happening in Kenya would not easily occur in Uganda. And about the governance system, Kenya has more of a devolution, whereby there are different counties with their own governments. So if we talk of infrastructure, I think every county collects its own taxes and even they plan for their resources. In fact, in terms of national distribution, I think the Kenyan national cake is fairly shared compared to Uganda. Uganda is very imbalanced. Whether you start from the cabinet, you go to the parastatals, you go to the institutions like learning institutions, you go to the health authorities, and so on. You will realize that there are a lot of disparities and imbalances. So the two are like oil and water. And finally, I just want to say that you were saying the youth, I think, like a group of hooligans who have no kind of clear ideological collection. I beg to concur. I think the youth stipulated and outlined very clear issues like regarding corruption, unnecessary kind of government portfolios, like creating certain offices that does not even align with the constitution and so on. If you go on that they cannot govern for a day, I can tell you that the alternative voices in Kenya that actually might even govern better than the Ruto kind of side of the government. Ruto has failed Kenya. Ruto is actually very heavy-handed, and I think if there's a way to let him rest, would be good. As you said, that Chindo governance is not just marching to anywhere. Our own Uganda, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the leader some of you might adore, Museveni, just actually went to the bush forcefully and fought a government that was in power, that was elected by the people also. So it's in the constitution. A government can change peacefully or forcefully, depending on the environment. Lynn, what's the next question we were talking about?
I was saying the lessons we learned from them.
Yeah, the lessons is that I've already kind of mentioned a few. I think Kenyans are very determined and very focused. Although sometimes they might have their own setbacks, whereby they get so much into the identity, politics. Sometimes compromises their abilities, but I must say, despite having very sharp identity kind of parties and ideologies, still when it comes to national issues, at the end they do much better than Uganda. Kenyans, even you find that the opposition are able to come together and talk when there are issues. You can find Raila Odinga, Kalonzo, maybe Wetengula, Ruto, Ruto maybe and any other leader, when there are national issues that are at stake, they're able to join hands and galvanize the country to move in one direction. So we learn from Kenyans that, political ideological differences does not mean you're enemies. You must put your country first. And I hope also Uganda, we can learn from that because as you can see in Uganda, the government of Museveni has no respect, for alternative voices. They treat the likes of Jagolanyi, the messages, just like toys. They're beaten left and right. That does not augur well. They might not be right, but there are better ways on how to address and interact with those with, alternative, voices. And secondly, too, I think also the youth in Uganda should learn from their counterparts in Kenya. The youth in Uganda have not yet, I think, made their feet wet, in this political struggle. As I said before, that Ugandans are very sensitive when it comes to tear gas. That's why some of the establishment apologies say they have a very strong kind of strike to encounter any kind of situation because indeed we Ugandans have shown that we actually fear. We don't sacrifice. I don't think any government can shoot and kill the entire country. If you try to shoot people down 100, they will turn on you too. So I think Ugandans should learn to stand up and sacrifice. The youth of Kenya came up with very clear ideas and they led by example. They put aside their differences and galvanize themselves based on a cause. They want a more inclusive, transparent, progressive country. Thank you.
Francis Kamuhanda, let's take your lessons from what's happening in Kenya and maybe what the opposition in Uganda could learn from there, because we noticed that the opposition in Uganda is continually dwindling, and we need to know, do you need to employ Gen Zs in making sure that you do some work in Uganda?
Thank you, Lynn, and the other panelists, and for a wonderful discussion. Straight to what Lynn think lessons do we learn from the Kenyan solution. Number one, it is nationalism. To see that the youth are working in as far as nationalism is concerned is a big lesson for us to learn, that youth or young generation today.
I think a few lessons. We are all discussing the finance bill, but if you are following the social media on these protests, the Kenyan youth have already moved on to highlight a few other concerns. And what really, and what really caught my attention was the outcry of lack of jobs and how their youth are mistreated in the Middle East. And I thought about our kadamas, as they are called, the girls that throng through Entebbe airport going into some sort of self-inflicted slavery into the Middle East. And yet our country celebrates that. I think it's either the second or the third foreign exchange income earner for Uganda is remittances from the diaspora, but those remittances come through the tears and the blood of these young girls. Some of them lose their lives, some are tortured, some lose their body parts to people they don't understand, and they are all going because they have no job opportunities in Uganda. They have no future in Uganda, so they are desperate to really opt for that hard journey. We all know what happens there, and the mega payment they get from there. So if the Ugandan youth are really to learn something from Kenya, is that they can stand up and advocate for themselves. They can really change that trajectory. Why should our young people, they are educated to enrich Ugandan economy, they are not supposed to be suffering somewhere in another country just because they don't have opportunities in Uganda. Yet we can create those opportunities. We know we can. We don't even have a large number of educated youth. So if you can't accommodate less than 1 million of your young people and give them jobs and a future, what type of a country are you? So if Ugandans really, if there is one lesson, you Ugandans, if you are a young person and you are really being shipped abroad to go and slave away in the Middle East, to pay the Ugandan politicians enough taxpayers' money so that they can have enough to drink in Ugandan bars. You can borrow a leaf from Kenyans. Stand up for yourselves, advocate for yourselves. This is the time. I think the Kenyans didn't give us an opportunity, but they gave us an example we can emulate. It's high time we hold Ugandan leaders accountable. Every year we lose more than 10 trillion Ugandan shillings in corruption. And that's not to mention the excessive expenditure in political patronage. The president alone takes $1 billion, 1 billion Ugandan shillings a day. For what? Why, if we put that money, the 10 trillion Uganda shillings, in productive ventures, we can't fail to create jobs for these graduates who finish school after spending all they have in education and end up with no jobs on Kampala streets. That is even not to mention the unemployed, those who end up driving borders or whatever because they can't get any other good opportunity, but they fear going outside to slave away. So Ugandan youth, please do something about it. I hope you are listening. I hope you are following what your neighbors are doing. Don't sleep on that. Another thing we can do is try to hold our MPs accountable. If your MP in your village, or my MP is now going through anti-corruption court because he stole they found a lump sum of money in his bedroom. My MP is Michael Mawanda, so I don't know how I will advocate for anything when he's in prison. But let's talk to our MPs. Let's start from anywhere. Let's hold our MPs accountable. We need services. Sorry?
The woman MP is there also.
Yeah, there is woman MP and I can really talk to the neighbors. We have other constituents around. So let's hold our leaders accountable, even if it's the LC3 chairman. This is not about the president. The president doesn't mess up alone. Like you see in Kenya, the MPs are already passing the bill. The president finally said, no, we should do something about it. So the problem starts from where you are in your LC3, because the LC ones don't have the resources. So where you put your tax money, where you know your money goes, go back there and demand accountability. And you can do it in several ways. You can write, you can talk, you can walk. Do whatever it takes, and let's put our country in order, because that's our destiny, that's our future, and that's our life.
All right, thank you, Miriam. Francis, sorry you got cut before you could finish your comment, but I also want to come back to you Ugandans in diaspora. Are there lessons you pick from these demonstrations in Kenya? So, Francis, if you could.
Before I was cut off, I was saying that one of the lessons we learn is nationalism, that the youth are awakening up, thinking deeply about different countries. In Africa, should go a leaf and keep the mantle. Then number, as other panelists have said, there should be demand for accountability, all levels of institutions, because that's where the problem starts, and the be done does not reach the common person or uplift the then this I would encourage that we should always, that public anger over economic hardships, we need all to coming out, and especially the youth, we are able to come out. Otherwise we cannot sit idle where other people are just playing messing up the country. We have to stand up. That's the lesson that we learn. Then another important lesson that I learned is that as Ugandans, we should also know that a population shift, a generation, we should seize this opportunity to know that it is our time to correct the wrongs that either past regimes have done or that we have done. So let's use the opportunity of a generation as far as and cleaning up the country. Another important thing, it has sent a voice of populism that you cannot directly influence policies that are not pro-people, and then you think that they will come to pass. People now are land, people are land, and I hope if in the whole of Africa you can keep the mantle to fight populism, that would be a plus in as far as the Then we also learn that there is the right expression, the freedom of speech, and so which, unlike in Uganda, is suppressed, and we try to fight for that civic space that we have not yet attained. And another lesson we learn is self-motivation. For example, if people are not self-motivated, if you don't feel the pinch of what is taking place in your country, and then you say at your level, what can you do to change the status quo? Then you are equally supporting the wrongs that are being done by the government, whether you are in it or not. So we need to participate. We need to feel the pain up to a level that even when we go on the street and we are beaten, we can't feel it anymore. Anyway, if you have been idle and suffering under the arms of government, so what is it that can stop us from having a march and then show our discontent? Then setting up and fighting corruption. I don't think in 2005, he corrupted members of parliament and other people in ensuring that they remove the time. In 2017, he did the same, planting corruption. You saw the mosquito and all this. So for me, you can't tell me that the same Museveni who is coming. You also have budgets coming to parliament for approval. All that or another embezzlement, corruption at the high order. But having said that, that does not stop us to going according to generally from the level going upwards. And for me, I encourage the citizens to begin taking up matters in their hands, not in a violent way, but in a way that is civil, that is constitutional, to ensure that we stamp out all these corrupt leaders. And in the as alternative governments, which people call the opposition, we have done our part. We have mobilized the youth. But because the civic space is limited, that's why you see you can't go and hold major rallies like to teach some of the youth what role they need to play in leadership. But as AMT, we have been doing that. What do you need to do? This is your country. You are the next leaders. But if you are given power, how do you conduct yourself? What do you have to do? But another lesson that we learn is that Uganda, we still lack planning. People who plan, who are at the national planning body or authority, they are indeed lacking, because this is not the first time that when Kenya catches fire, Uganda sneezes. I mean, when Kenya catches a cold, Uganda sneezes fire. Up to now, we don't have any kind. So if there are things that we have to depend that come from Kenya, still continue suffering, and it is important that we also learn to plan for our country, and we effective the planning. But the way that government can do it, no. His goes, government of pure and proactive government comes in, we may not achieve what we need as a country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. As we come to the end of our conversation today, I want to thank you for making time. But if there are any reactions just before we conclude, I'm happy to take them. Anybody? Simon, conclusive remarks as we sign out?
Yes, I think the right to protest is very fundamental to be guaranteed in the annals of books of law, and people should be given opportunity to air their grievances the way they should, because if they're affected and they feel that the information is not seeping through the other channels, they should be able to be given that. But that right to protest should be taken with the need for it to be regulated. It should not exceed to include creating chaos and destroying property, and also to take over government. Because once it goes beyond that, it is another animal altogether, which has to be dealt with differently. From what I'm seeing from Kenya is that the protests, which started as peaceful, were suspicious to why they were saying Ruto must go, when they actually wanted to mean that the budget must go. And even when Ruto finally conceded totally, they still are saying they must continue, which means there is some other idea. If you want to change presidency, there are clearly established ways and means of changing government, but not to use unfinished business this way. So in my view, I don't support that. And I hope that the government will engage to ensure this as peaceful as possible, it is ended, and that the issues raised by those people, which lists are becoming endless, things which are supposed to be done in 10 years, they want them to be done in a day. I find that very unreasonable. So I hope those proponents of this idea of saying that Ruto is weak, cannot rule, must go, should take into cognizance the legal frameworks and policy frameworks that we have in place. As Uganda, yes, it's a wake-up call that even our Ugandans can actually rise, even if we have fairly very strong both counter and repressive measures and mechanisms. We should also be open to listening, so that it doesn't take us into unnecessary bloody battles, the unemployment, the dividing gap between those who have and those who don't have. The growing age, the recent statistics, Madam Lynn, you did not bring it up. It exposes so much that people who are below 15 years are actually 50% of the 45 million. That's scary. And so we need maybe next time to discuss this, but our figures are far and by word telling. So yes, I think we learn lessons, and I hope we also do the same to preempt another challenges similar to Kenya to Uganda.
Right, thank you, Simon. Any other comments? And okay. Yes,
I want to
Miriam.
add on that yes, all rights come with responsibilities, like Simon said. Please watch out. There is something that came out during this Kenyan protest, and it's been a trick that Museveni uses during protests, if you've been following closely. When people go on the streets, very peaceful, very organized, they hire lumpens to come and cause chaos. And that's what led to the death of young kids at Parliament, because they had hired lumpens to infiltrate the protest and try to dismantle buildings and all that. And then the police started shooting. So that's a sabotage that is always come to disrupt any peaceful protest. I want to call upon Ugandans, you Francis, please take note. You are in politics, you are at the front line. Whenever there is a protest, make sure that you identify those lumpens and you kick them out, so that the government doesn't use it as an excuse to blackmail you. So the protesting is a constitutional right, yes, and rights come with responsibilities. But if we are talking about responsibilities, the politicians should also be responsible and stop embezzling our money. So it should apply both ways. if the leadership was responsible and being held accountable, there wouldn't be need for protest. So the people who are protesting are already victims, and we can't even try to hold them accountable to the criminals who are already messing up their country. It's the politicians to be responsible first and foremost, and we wouldn't even have a need to protest. So even saying that Uganda is ripe for protest is an indictment on Museveni's government, and he should take note. It's not too late to change. It's not too late for him to step down and say he cannot handle, he cannot do anything. Corruption has gone to astronomical levels. He told us his 10 points government have been all turned around, like he built something and then turned around and ate all of it, that now we are running in negative as far as his legacy and accountability is concerned. And it's high time he steps out and gives Ugandans a break, please. As for the diaspora Ugandans, please, not only Ugandans, but all Africans. Let me tell you something that I learned during the Sudan protest. When you go out there and we joined the Sudanese in the protest against the dictatorship, Bashir. So when you step out, people listen to you and people support you. So all these, the African Americans, the Friends of Africa, everybody out there is waiting for something to happen. They all know that some African leaders are messed up. But when you citizens come out and protest, everybody's ready to join hands with you and support you. We know Ruto is, for instance, a blue-eyed boy for the Western imperialism, same as Museveni. But if we come out and expose their crimes, whatever they are doing, I'm sure these leaders, say in Washington, in London, they are bound to listen to the people's grievances compared to the leadership, because they also have a system where they also hold their governments accountable. So let's learn from each other. Let's try to improve our countries. Let's build an Africa which we can all be proud of.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't have much to say, but I just want to say that let us learn from what transpired in Kenya. And I think my appeal is to President Ruto to listen to the voices of the Kenyan people. The Kenyans have spoken from the coast, the central, from Nyanza, from Western, that it should either toe the line or step aside. Secondly, it should actually admit and address some of the illegal things it's doing that are contrary to the Constitution. There are so many kind of positions and portfolios that he has created that are wasting taxpayers' money. Those resources can be channeled in better places. And thirdly, the death of the innocent youngsters should be accounted for. He should hold the police officers and their leaders accountable so that the youngsters can get justice, even in their departed souls. And lastly, to our own country people in Uganda, I think the writings are on the wall. His Excellency Museveni has done his part. The best he can do for Ugandans to give way. There's nothing he can add right now productive for Ugandans. Corruption has gone at a very, very high level. We have lost focus. You go to the parliament, has been compromised. The judiciary is wanting. The army is one man's army. The police the same. So it'll be almost a failed state. So I appeal that we don't go, down the drainage. There's still time to, salvage this situation. I just speak as an innocent Ugandan. I want the best for my country, even I'm out. Uganda is a very beautiful country. We should actually promote, inclusivity, diversity in our national cohesiveness. In that way, we shall build a better Uganda. But the way things are at the moment, we are fragmented. We are a time bomb. So please, this is my message, and we can learn from other parts of the world. You know, when Mobutu collapsed, so what happened? When Gaddafi collapsed, what happened? When Said Barre in Somalia in the early 90s collapsed, what happened? What happened? So right now, Museveni is an institution, is a judiciary, is the army. You know, God forbid if it's not there, what is the future of Uganda? Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for making time today to have this conversation, and I hope our input, pays off at some point. I thank you very much, and I hope we catch you again next time. Thank you, Simon, for joining us. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Okot and Miriam, and I wish you all the very best.